Wait, is that Klaire? In Klaire's bedroom? Klaire, what are you doing? Oh, slime pup. Pure, lovely slime pup. How I yearned for the simple days where I was as content with the world as you. What are you talking about? But now, I just want to watch the world burn. I want to see it all melt. Whoa! Wait a minute. Is the world actually on fire? Is she actually willing this into existence? There's nothing you can do to stop me, slime pup. This world shall melt like an ice cube forced to the burning fire. Wait, Klaire, speaking of burning an ice, why melt the world when you can use the melting ice cube in Kirby 64? That's a great idea, actually. I'm gonna go do that now. Bye. She can't be serious with the stuff that she says, can she? Kirby 64 is one of the most creative Kirby games of all time. Allowing you to combine any two copy abilities together to get a brand new one, the possibilities feel endless. From a refrigerator that throws out food that you can eat, to a curling stone that allows you to move pretty fast, a shooting fireball that allows you to move really fast, even a figure skater with quite the dashing technique. With all of these in mind, what hilarious creativity happens when you combine the fiery heat of burning with the chilling coolness of ice? Yeah, we're gonna try to beat the game with nothing but this. But I mean, okay, let's make this as crazy as we possibly can. From the first level of the game, that you can have both burning and ice at least, which thankfully it's only the second room of the second level, so most of the game, all the way to the very end, we are only allowed to use ice and burning. Or, as I'll lovingly call it in this video, the melting ice cube. To really heat things up, or make your blood cold, some combo of the two so the ice cube melts, I guess. We're going to see if you can clear Kirby 64 with only the melting ice cube in a perfect run. That means no damage and, well, that's basically all it means. We're not going to be going too crazy here or anything. We don't even have to worry about getting crystal shards or food or lives, pretty much everything. All that matters is, can you clear Kirby 64 damageless as a melting ice cube, the impossible Kirby 64 challenge? Let's find out. Okay, actually, wait, hold on. So some notes before we begin. Of course, as stated, I can only use burning plus ice throughout the run. There's a tiny exception we'll get to in a bit, but once they're both available, that's all I can use. On top of that, what makes this an impossible challenge is that I also can't get hit. A fully damageless run, start to finish, with the finish being Miracle Matter, by the way, since we can't 100% with just the melting ice cube, using nothing but said ice cube. Third, I'll be giving out a rating for every level once cleared, based on how difficult it was. I'll be using a difficulty scale of 1 to 5 rage puppies. 1 is lowest, 5 is highest. Fourth, since this video is really heckin' long, and I kinda sorta need this done for Kirby's anniversary. Happy anniversary, Kirby, by the way, we love you! Plus, I gotta stroke my own ego a little bit here. For footage, I'll only be using my successful runs of any given level. Trust me, they got the point across just fine for how difficult of a challenge this was. That said, if you want to see the 8.5-hour struggle, I streamed the whole playthrough, both on Twitch and YouTube. Consider following me on either, or both, that would be pretty heckin' nice, to catch my streams live. And of course, if you like the video, the idea, or just like the puppy, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. If you can't think of anything about the video itself to say, somehow look at how long this is, I don't know, you can just type, "We love you, Kirby, happy anniversary," or something. I just love reading the comments. Alrighty then, enough wasting time. Let's get this run started. Kinda. You see, we can't actually get ice until the second level, as mentioned earlier. If you skip the beginning, this is your wake-up call. Go back, watch everything, go. but at least we can get burning at the start of this level. For the sake of not boring people, because like I said before I streamed this, I just used speedrun strats for the first whole level and moved on. As far as this first level is concerned, I give it no rage pups. I can't give it anything because we don't have the ice part of the ice cube. It's a pretty important piece of the pie. Still, we reach the second level, Mix Fire and Ice, and instead of getting Sonic Boom, or the NES game, or a Dance of Fire and Ice, why are there so many games that have Fire and Ice in the name? We get the infamous Melting Ice Cube, and right off the bat, we can see how this is going to be a problem. See, for those of you who may be a bit forgetful on their Kirby facts, let the expert here remind you, there are these things called enemies, and touching them without an attack deals damage. This is a perfect run and all, so we can't actually take that damage, and while the footage has been doing a remarkable job of showcasing just how small the range of this ability is, yeah, it's real small. Don't get me wrong, it's still an attack, but just like in real life, you need to time it just right in order to actually hurt someone with a melting ice cube. You move over AAA video games, you're losing realism points to Kirby 64 the Crystal Shards. Thankfully, unlike many of the later games in the series, every regular enemy dies in one hit. We have other ways of dealing with them, like jumping into them or doing a fancy, God, and really fucking slow, oh my goodness, slide kick. What winds up being the much scarier about enemies isn't so much coming from them, but the levels they're in, which we'll touch on when the levels get a bit trickier. What never actually gets tricky, for the most part, are all the mini-bosses. The worst I can say about them is that some of them took me multiple tries. Now, I'll comment on the more difficult ones when we come across them, but their strategy of standing in one place and looking silly is nothing compared to my strategy of mashing the attack button, hoping and crying until they explode. It's pretty simple stuff. What's not so simple are the boss fights, and while you may think I'm skipping over a ton of stuff and getting right into Wispy, no, I struggled to do much of anything against Adeline. Yeah, I bet you never heard that one before, but she legit gave me a lot of problems. Not to mention if I lost, I had to restart the whole dang level. Not fun. Not only does she summon a lot of different enemies, ones that can be real tricky to deal with if they're on screen long enough, but they also move around a lot. You're moving around, you know, the thing that you really don't want to see with an ability that has the smallest hitbox known to curb kind. That's not even getting into Dark Matter, who's constantly moving and is in the air for the whole fight. He just moves back and forth. He's just too high up for us and our melting ice soup self to reach. You gotta do this the old-fashioned and honest way, and trust me, doing that was rough. When I finally did make it to Adeline, I just threw my hands up, did a slide kick, and accepted that ice cubes apparently know how to slide kick for now, and moved on. Honestly, I'm gonna give this level 4 rage pups out of 5. It's in the solid 2, maybe even 1 territory, until the insane difficulty spike that is Adeline. Seriously, can you believe it? This is one of the hardest fights in the game. Pop Star 3 is next, and this one wasn't nearly as bad. The level layout isn't as cluttered, meaning we can move around enemies much easier, although we can see very early that enemies like Baboo can pose a huge threat because they're constantly moving. And no, this isn't just a one-off thing with that Adeline fight. Mobile enemies are going to be a big issue for this entire playthrough. For now, though, we have some trusty slide kicks and our float of floatiness to help guide our way. In particular, we can use some very easy and super efficient speedrun strats to avoid most of the combat in the final room before day-to-day. We only have to deal with 2 enemies, Ghost Knight, who has a hitbox on his giant spear, which means we have to be giant careful, and another Bobu, which you clearly see has already done emotional damage to me. I'm in a panic on how to get past him. This is what challenge runs do to people, everybody. Similar to the previous level, we have a bit of a boss fight here, although day-to-day is significantly easier than Adeline. The simple reason is, as anticlimactic as it sounds, he stands still the whole time. Anytime he's about to move, he's all, "Whoa, I'm gonna move, you betcha, I'm gonna move, holy moly, you'll never believe this, I'm gonna move, yeah, I'm moving, yeah, he's still moving." Because of this, it only took a couple of tries before I found a good spot for wailing on him, let him jump to the skies, and wailed on him again. Now, I learned a lot about this fight that I didn't know. The stars that you inhale to fight him abilityless, they can hurt you? What even is Kirby 64 Perfect Run Melting Ice Cube? Like and subscribe. But this level only gets 2 Rage Pups out of 5. Day-to-day caused some resets, and so did some silliness, but overall, this was largely stress-free. Wispy is a bit of an oddball here because I certainly found Phase 1 slaughtering Wispy's children. Like, seriously, what are these? What Kirby says they're his children, their names are Wispy Woods Jr. Using the phrase slaughtering children for a Kirby game, it sounds insane. These are his kids! Wispy can reproduce, that's crazy! I'm sorry, where was I again? Oh, right. Slaughtering children is certainly tough. This kid sure can move, and Melting Ice Cube sure can't move. But similar to Day-to-Day, it was all about finding the proper positioning. And thankfully, it didn't take me long to realize that, unlike Dark Matter, these tree fellas are below me, not above. And I could easily wait for them to turn around, jump over them, melt on their scalps, and be out of any potential danger by the time I landed. They each only take 2 hits before dying, so once I hit them for the first time, I could actually land on them for the second because, as everybody does when their time has come, they explode. As for Phase 2, yeah, that was literally nothing. As soon as Wispy sends his spiky roots at you, you have like 10 years to get out of the way. Well, maybe not 10 years, it's the next boss, but still, you have a lot of time to get to safety. And since these are immobile, and I just finished getting all these hits on smaller, mobile, younger targets, why did Wispy send his kids to the slaughter, and where is Mrs. Woods? It wasn't difficult at all, hitting the roots and securing our first crystal shard, ending the world pop star. Wispy only gets 2 Rage Pups out of 5 here, not much to write home about. But this also means that, aside from the first level where the Melting Ice Cube is unavailable, we cleared the whole first world with only 1 problem. Seriously, Adeline's the hard one? Really? Rockstar 1 actually starts with the hardest part of the level. It's a very wide room with lots of enemies and obstacles. And by obstacles, I mean enemies on platforms that make me really scared. See, you can jump above them and use the Melting Ice Cube to take them out, but it's scary because... Actually, wait a minute, this is like really consistent. No surprise I got hit a lot in this level, so I needed to reset a lot. And around this time, I figured out that the Melting Ice Cube has a pretty great hitbox directly underneath it. And it makes sense if the whole thing makes Kirby a walking, living, smiling hitbox, and Kirby melts from the top, underneath them, yeah, that would be safest. I don't really know how or why we can apply logic to burning plus ice and get away with it, but it becomes a lifesaver not only for this part of the level, but honestly for the rest of the run. The rest of the level turns out to be fairly simple. The second room, we can take the high path, which is also the speedrun strat, and I only mention that to inflate my ego of knowing speedrun strats, while the mini-boss sure is a Kirby 64 mini-boss. Hey, at least they're happy. Wait, never mind, they're dead, my bad. Afterwards, we have an auto-scroller that's kinda scary because there are enemies in here, but thankfully they're easy to avoid, so we could just leave it there. Finally, this last room can also get fairly scary very quickly, blah, due to the Scarfies that home in on you, enemies that burrow out from underground, and the nerves kicking in from this being the last room of the level. Thankfully, as we mentioned earlier, most enemies here can be handled nicely with the vertical greatness of the Melting Ice Cube. Really? Greatness is the word we're going with here? Okay. And as I found out, even directly above Kirby is a fairly safe hitbox. So if we're concerned about stuff dropping down from above, we can handle it. I think I give this level 3 Rage Puppies out of 5. That first room really did cost me a lot of time. Rockstar 2 immediately has this hammerhead enemy, side tangent, but I always thought that was their name. I guess I can acknowledge they look more like an axe, but kid puppy Klaire Fluffle always thought they were hammers, don't ask. So come my adult years where I learned to browse Where Kirby because it's awesome, imagine my surprise to learn that they're called hacks. It's got nothing to do with hammers. My childhood died that day. Oh, and also they run at you pretty fast, and if you don't avoid them, you get hit because melting ice cubing them is really hard. Yikes. The whole of Rockstar 2 is pretty tricky if you don't take your time, and while patience is certainly rewarded in a run like this, as a speedrunner, I can't help but, try to go fast, flex a little bit. After having to redo the level multiple times, I did get pretty good at this first room, although the amount of times I got hit in the second because I just jumped into an enemy for no reason, far too many. Speaking of the second room here, there is a Mumbies early on. Sorry, Mumbies. Seriously, everyone go to Kirby right now. Look up uncommon enemy names. They're a gold mine of hilarity. Anyway, the early Mumby here is a big problem because we can't just move around them. Mumbies target Kirby if we aren't looking at them, similar to enemies like Boo from the Mario games. The simple answer is to use the melting ice cube's vertical reach to take care of it, and we can, but unlike every other enemy in this room, me jumping directly into them is actually part of the problem here. A full jump is way too high, so we'll get hit, but a short hop is way too low, and we miss. It took some practice and lots of crying, but eventually, I managed to find the perfect jump height. I was also able to find methods of getting the Mumby to move after us so that I didn't even have to jump. Both of these methods work, and I'd at least say they're faster than floating around them. And faster is more fun, no surprise, so I'll stick with these. The level cools down for a bit, and we see this enemy called New for the first time. And I have to stress how funny these names are, but this room with the rising platforms, it's another one that causes a lot of stress. The platforms themselves aren't that bad. You have more than enough time to run off and not be crushed, but these Kappars are really annoying and can very easily hit you with their cutter rings if you aren't careful. And while normally, yes, it's easy to be careful, maybe even doing so while going fast, tee-hee, that doesn't really work when you have a platform that's rising to crush you. Going above is scary because there are enemies, namely another Ghost Knight, that can hit you with their long-range attacks. And attacking ourselves, while an option, is really tough because we're a melting heckin' ice cube. Pretty non-lethal considering the Ghost Knight literally has a heckin' lance. What compounds all of this is that, if I do get hit and I have to reset, I gotta redo those first two rooms again. Still damageless, still melting ice cube only. Of course, doing the rooms several times is how I learned more efficient strats, but for the actual sake of not losing my mind so early on due to whatever causes ice cubes to melt, I don't know. This was a toughie. Did I just say I don't know what melts ice cubes? Once I finally made it back, I waited until I was nearly crushed to slide kick off the rising platform, and I noticed that the Kappars actually jump to, or close to, Kirby's height before attacking, which made things way easier. Ghost Knights are more scary in your head than in reality, or at least in Kirby's reality, because they're fairly slow to attack. If you don't need to move directly over them, they're pretty easy to avoid. So I just waited for a bit, slid off without touching the Ghost Knight, defeated the Kappar, and moved on with my life. The level still isn't over though, with a room that has a lot of Shatso firing at you, and yeah, this room looks pretty scary, but these can all easily be floated over. The enemies there do a good job of making you not want to float, but at this point, I'm such a champ at melting ice cubes, I got through this pretty okay. The final area is a day-to-day segment where we can't really do much of anything with Kirby, so the ending is a bit anticlimactic. Day-to-day himself is really sluggish and will prove frustrating later on, but for now he's not that bad, not too much in the way. Again, slow, but not in the way. As for the level itself, no doubt 4 Rage Pups out of 5. It's the first level that actually feels long, and while I still don't think anything here is quite as tough as Adeline, really, on the whole, it's the first level we've done that I actually think is tough. Which is really funny, because the next level, Rockstar 3, was one of the easiest in the whole run. I was not expecting this, since there are a lot of enemies in a small confined space that home in on you. It has the ingredients for a frustrating first room that precedes another small room with enemies that also attack from underneath, underwater for the first time in the game, and full of rooms that are nothing but underwater. Again, it has the makings of a brutal level, and even I forgot to record the level and had to use the stream footage, but no, I did this one on my second try. The underwater especially surprised me, but due to my speedrunning expertise, the enemies just never came close to hitting me. Even outside of the water, despite the potential frustration, the melting ice cube did its thing, and I won with ease. Now, I guess this ability is broken. Put it on TV tropes, people. You watch this insane video if you don't understand the reference. 1 rage puppy out of 5, by the way. Rockstar 4 proved to be much more difficult, although not for the reasons you'd expect. Believe it or not, and this is only the first of 2, maybe 3 times where I'm gonna say this, the mini-boss actually took me a while to figure out. I saw it and immediately thought, hey, I can just attack from underneath and be super safe. I am so smart. But alas, it doesn't reach because why would it? So I needed to attack from the side. That is a monumental pain when you have other enemies called Spark Guy that give you spark and are shooting sparks at you. The melting ice cube can kind of absorb the sparks, but hitting the mini-boss, the enemies, and their projectiles all at once, probably not happening. This move does only last for a second or 2. Come on. Before this point, it's a lot of nothing. Dodging Shotzo Blast, skipping most of them by floating, seeing the Adeline puzzle and skipping it by floating. You're having this wide open room with the enemies and moving platforms that we totally skip by floating. All right, come on, Kirby 64, give me a break here. But then we reach this mini-boss who we can't skip by floating, of course. What's even more annoying about this is that the enemies can spawn directly where we need to jump to in order to hurt the mini-boss, whose name is Big Spark Eye, by the way, in case you thought Spark Eye was too void of creativity. Eventually, after much hassle, we got the winning run by running back and forth to bait the enemies and their attacks away from where Kirby would be. Not the most involved strat, but this second hit scared the heck out of me. And let's not forget, there's 1 room left in this level that we skip by floating. Kirby 64, come on! Also, this was 3 rage pups out of 5. Up next is Pix, the boss of Rockstar, and this was a doozy. Despite the mini-bosses being a complete joke, the regular bosses had me worried. Wispy was thankfully a bit easier than I expected, but I knew Pix would be a nightmare, if only for the insane minute-long sequence of me virtually having to do nothing every time I got hit. I initially thought to make a suspend point. Ooh, sounding official. Ooh. Directly after this boring mess, but that would technically be manipulating the RNG, since the order Pix does attacks in is completely random. Feeling that would defeat the point of a run like this, I opted against it, and every time I made a single mistake, I had to waste another minute. Needless to say, I'm not a fan of Pix. Of course, the fight itself took several attempts, and just looking at it should paint the whole picture as to why. But the melting ice cube being so small, the only way to deal damage to Pix is to hit them as they're moving towards you. Needless to say, that prospect is horrifying, but after so many failed attempts, I unfortunately got really good at spacing my attacks to the point where, scary as it looks, I don't think this ice cube that is way too high up on the planet, or the stars' whatever atmosphere, to not melt faster, was in any danger. The big issue was the triangle laser beam attack that they do. These attacks basically spell death if I jump at them, but they fire so low to the ground that the ice cube can actually melt them from the ground. No need to jump. Sure, it puts me in danger if I ever go after the red or blue ones, but they are technically safe. And you know me, efficiency and speed are my 2 middle names. Klaire Efficiency, Speed Fluffle. These VTubers just, they're getting more and more ridiculous, people. So, despite a lot of close calls, I pulled through and I won. I wish there was more I could say on this, especially since these jerks get 4 rage pups out of 5, but that's just the insane punishment for getting hit. Losing that minute constantly was so bad. With Rockstar completed, we move on to World 3, Aqua Star. The vibes here are just so good. Kirby 64, you never let us down in that department. Unfortunately, we're let down by Aqua Star Run because I decided to do a no damage melting ice cube run, and for some reason I thought it was okay. Right off the bat, there are some pompous Popeyes that get in our way. These are scary enemies because they shoot volcano rocks at us, and given I've said so many times, even though the video isn't even half over yet, that melting ice cube kinda stinks, yeah, they're tricky to deal with. Good timing is usually all it takes, but yeah, you get surprised sometimes. There is at least some reprieve thanks to good, reliable speedrun strats, but still, it's a toughie. In particular, while I'm unsure if this is the first time we've seen this enemy or not, it's the first time I'm bringing them up, so I don't care. I hate Yariko. Here, it's not so bad. Just keep running and or not jumping and you're safe. But as the game goes on, this enemy is placed in the most frustrating places. Even in more casual play, this enemy drives me nuts. This is in part because their spears that they throw on the ground stick around for a little while. In areas like this very same room, where there's water spewing from the top, it just makes the whole thing much worse, because we have to wait for it to disappear, and book through it while we have the chance. The melting ice cube itself is too slow to reliably deal with this spear and move past the next one. This is hardly the worst appearance of this enemy, like I said, but the earlier I get it in your heads that I really don't like this enemy, the better. And you know what? The level still isn't over, because in the final room of the stage, you need to keep moving. Enemies that jump out of holes, zoos that throw lightning bolts at you from the clouds, terrain you need to float over while enemies can attack you. It's all pretty tricky stuff. Pile on top of that, a mini-boss, who's really not much of a threat, actually, forget that last part, and you've got one of the trickier levels thus far. I'd still say it's only 3 Rage Pups out of 5. A few areas are thankfully consistently simple, but I did have to do a lot of retries on this one. More than I remember, frankly, so I'm hoping some level I forgot about was super painful, and it doesn't come back to bite me crazy later in the video. Foreshadowing, maybe? Down the mountain stream, or Aqua Star 2 if you haven't jammed to the music in this level like I have for Super 1, isn't so bad. It took me a lot of retries for whatever reason, but upon reviewing the footage, it's all pretty simple. The mini-boss may look scary since they're always moving and we can't quite reach from underneath, but... Oh, wait, we can reach from underneath. We're not quick enough to one-cycle, sadly, but as long as we avoid the crab underneath us, we're fine. While these sections are pretty automatically, we don't have to worry unless we goof up, which I am very prone to do, what can I say? I'm not bidding the silly accusations here, but still, easy is easy. The next room is harmless, we just grab some candy right away, take it to the very end, so that really just leaves the final room for any kind of issue, silliness notwithstanding. Thankfully for the sanctity of the run, this final room can be pretty tough. Unlike the speedrun, I can't just use regular burning to skip through everything. I've got ice melting here, you know. The layout is pretty tricky too, with enemies, platforms, and logs placed in areas that make dodging them while moving forward very difficult. You can usually jump into enemies on platforms from underneath, but I found it very consistent here. And only here, by the way. Any other time I tried this out, it turned out like just fine. Really what saves the day here is Kirby's float. Yeah, it may be limited in this game, but it still safely allows us to move ahead without sacrificing much speed because of the current pushing us back onto the ground. The float's been turning out really good in this run, which is weird, because that's probably the first time anybody's ever had to say that for Kirby 64. That's how you know this is a dire run, I guess. Oh, and 2 Rage Puppies out of 5, just for that final room. Aqua Star 3 has Cha-Cha in it, and if you've ever played Kirby 64, you know why that's important. And if you haven't, here, look at Cha-Cha. Honestly, they're like the coolest thing ever. As for the level itself, it's a fairly straightforward one. The enemy placements are a little scary, but there's always just enough room to either jump over them or set up the melting ice cube's actual attack to get that sneaky hidden. Yeah, I've been ragging on this thing a lot, but honestly, for Kirby 64 at least, it gets the job done with regular enemies. Not saying I recommend using it or anything, holy moly, no, this is awful. In the funniest way possible, I love it. But on my first good attempt, it was the mini-boss that stopped me in my tracks, I know, of all things. That was just a wee bit too slow, so when I fought the mini-boss and won, I just, like, went a lot faster. This final area with the logs, it can be a bit janky, but as long as we don't actually touch the floor, they can't even touch us. Honestly, this level, 1 Rage Pup out of 5. This is like really easy. Now, Aqua Star 4 had me very worried, considering it's an entirely underwater level. Movement is slow, using abilities is slow, we lose our defensive options. It seemed like it would be a nightmare. And I got hit almost immediately, so yes, things are going to be tricky. The nice thing about underwater movement in Kirby 64, though, is how free it is. You're allowed to move in whatever ways you want without sacrificing any of your movement. Honestly, despite what most games teach us, I feel like moving around is actually faster and, dare I say, more efficient than regular old movement in this game. At least when you're stuck with the melting ice cube. Once I got the handle on underwater movement again, it actually felt really good. And don't get me wrong, this is a very scary level, just one that feels more fair than the average one. Rooms like the third one with currents that push you towards spinning Gordos, yeah, that's very scary. And the room right after with the blowfish that can only be safely defeated by getting pretty close to them, but the one is underneath you and the current is pushing you towards it and melting ice cube's too slow. Yeah, it's some scary stuff. And the thing that ultimately got me multiple times wasn't easy to dodge Gordo. You know, what can I say? Something, silly accusations, etc. In a bizarre twist of fate, again, the hardest part of this level wound up being the mini-boss. With the current pushing around, it can be scary avoiding the Glunk's attacks while also dodging the big blowfish. Yes, mini-boss names are just regular enemy names with big in front of them. It took me a bit to get the hang of this one, but I don't know, as long as I hugged the walls and made sure the Glunks didn't hit me, I was fine. I don't know, this level feels really good when you get the feel for it, but it's easy to make some mistakes in. I think it deserves 2 Rage Puppies out of 5. Now, oh god, Acro. I was dreading this even more than Pix, and it's obvious why. This is a mobile boss who's underwater, and not to mention it's an actual boss, which means I have to attack with it, with the melting ice cube. And then phase 2 happens, and Acro camps below you, again, constantly moving around left and right, all while enemies are on the sides to make sure my life for this challenge would be as miserable as possible. So how bad was it? Well, volume warning here, maximum gamer pup and all that, but... First try! Yeah, as it turns out, the melting ice cube can actually hit Acro phase 1 while grounded. I didn't have to risk anything, especially due to how long the attack stays out due to the slowness of being underwater. Phase 2 was scarier, but again, when Acro shoots upwards, he kind of just goes in a straight line. It's insanely easy to time and space the melting ice cube hit, even if nerves kind of got in the way once or twice. But yeah, Acro was first try, easier than some mini-bosses even. 1 Rage Puppy out of 5, let's go! With that uplifting ending in our hearts, we move on to Neo Star, and... this is where things took a turn for the worse. Up to this point, this has been a fun, albeit tricky, and fair run with one of the memeiest abilities of all time. As early as Neo Star 1, I am contemplating giving our first 5 Rage Pups out of 5. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. What makes it so tough? Well, right away, there's a lot of grass covering the foreground. And granted, it looks cool, and it is part of the challenge of the game. I'm not gonna call this bad design or anything like that. Really, the only thing here that's bad is the melting ice cube. But given the limitations of said ice cube, dodging enemies, traps, spikes, and who knows what else was more difficult than some entire levels. This first room alone cost me so many resets. The real aggravator here, though, is absolutely Yariko. Around now is when they start placing this little brat in the most inconvenient of places with spear throws that make basic platforming and movement much harder than at any point before this. Absolutely, they're at their worst in this mini-boss room, an endlessly respawning set of them, throwing spears that linger on the ground while you quickly need to kill the big Galbo before he starts breathing fire on you. Individually, this isn't so bad, and with a real ability, you can clear this with little to no effort, But wow, is trying to do this melting and damageless the absolute worst. So many resets to seemingly unavoidable enemy attacks. And no, hiding behind the Galbo doesn't work since you're gonna get hit by one of the spears, or the Galbo itself, of course. And getting hit here means resetting and having to do that super difficult first room again. Ultimately, what won me the day was the same thing that it always does, speed. Let the first spear get thrown, run through ASAP, and just melt the big Galbo to death and leave before any other problems can be caused. I think at the end of the day, though, I'm only giving this 4 Rage Puppies out of 5. These 2 rooms were bad enough, but honestly, the others were fine. There's this vertical room with Yariko throwing spears that had me on edge, but it wasn't nearly as bad as our previous offenders. The other rooms are pretty safe as long as you don't try floating over everything. The game is finally picking up on this. And the final part of this level, it's a candy section. Those are basically like Mario Maker automatic levels. The entire thing, or most of it, would have to be as bad as the problem parts to be a bona fide super toughie. Still, I'd say we finally topped Adeline for the hardest part of the game. That first room, I have to stress, it gave me nightmares, people. Neo Star 2, to kind of breeze through this one, trust me when you know the time we have, was the easiest level of Neo Star for sure. It still gets 3 Rage Puppies out of 5, that's just what we're dealing with here. Neo Star was awful, but I wouldn't say anything felt brutal or unfair overall. Just a very consistent level of, oh come on, throughout. Of all things, I think the enemy gauntlet near the end, were a bunch of blob enemies that don't do anything other than land on the ground, gave me the most trouble. Sure, there are things like Zeus throwing lightning clouds from below, not just above, which are tough enough to dodge due to your limited vertical options. There's cannon shots that you need to zoomy through with the current to avoid getting hit, having a hard time. And how could I forget the crushing room at the end? But no, these basic enemies gave me the most trouble. It's because there's so gosh darn many of them. And I wound up having to play this one pretty safe, but hey, I got it done. That's all that matters. Now, Neo Star 3. Okay, I know I haven't been bringing this up much, but one thing that using the melting ice cube does, obviously, is take up a lot of time. This isn't a speedrun or anything, but I'm trying to move at a brisk pace. Speedrun strats are just really good for avoiding problems, which are the #1 thing we want to avoid here. But if I have to take a while on something, I'm fine with it, as long as the monotony of it all doesn't really settle in. Because of this, most levels so far have taken 20 minutes on average, maybe a little more tops. Not too bad. Neo Star 3 almost took me 45 minutes to finish. There's so many reasons why this level is brutal, but let's go room by room and see why. Of course, the first one wound up being one of the hardest parts. I reset here a lot, and it really boils down to enemy placement. I try to use floating as a last resort since it limits the amount of options I have to keep Kirby safe like crazy. It's really well designed. But when there are enemies and the melting ice cubes is blind spots, or right in front of it, it doesn't really matter, we're gonna have problems. Star blocks are lined up in a way that kinda helps, but there's too much elevation here, so we have to use big jumps to get over. And this is a huge problem because the higher we have to jump, the harder it is to safely time when to attack with the melting ice cube. On top of that, the room itself is pretty long, thus making me rather prone to making mistakes. Not a great look. The second room has a lot of the same issues, only longer, harder, and it has a bunch of bottomless pits. They are very liberal with pits here, and the platforms you can land on are safely getting pretty small by the end. The platforming itself, it's fine, but of course they're throwing enemies at you to make sure that you're not having an easy time. With our best methods of dealing with these airborne enemies being a heckin' air puff, which is good for one enemy at a time, maybe? At a time when we have to deal with multiple? Or, you know, the melting ice cube that hits us half the time anyway? Oh, and if we do get hit and we have to reset, gotta do that first room again. Yay! Thankfully, the next couple of rooms are reserved for Adeline puzzles, but the room after, right back into the goods. Or the bads, I don't know. Even thinner platforms, even more bottomless pits, even more enemies, both in quantity and variance, that are placed in tricky spots on the air and on the ground. And of course, said enemies either have attacks that home in on you, or they just go full kamikaze and home in on you themselves. Heck, even if the enemies don't home in on you, there's a chance their attacks have such good range that you could be above them and you still get hit by something. We also have to do 2 awful rooms if we mess this one up, which is very easy, only adding to the frustration. But, okay, we made it to the mayhem. The level still isn't over, specifically because this room is so long and it adds all new kinds of obstacles and issues about halfway through. Now, we need to climb up vertically while avoiding cutter enemies from a position where defeating them with the ice cube is so difficult. We need to run over terrain that falls from underneath our feet unless we jump, placing us over enemies that can hit us if we're not careful. And then we just forget about there being solid ground at all or stable terrain that's easy to land on with enemies that aren't in between every platform. Yeah, at the very end, there's text that spells Kirby. It's cute, but the homing Bronto birds cost me a reset into one of my best attempts of this whole level. And thankfully, after the Kirby rocks, it's finally over. And you know what? You're in for a surprise with this one. Oh, no, not that I give Neo Star 3 as a level 5 Rage Pups out of 5. Our first one, totally deserved. No, that's not the problem. The problem is Neo Star 4, much, much worse. Neo Star 3 was bad, yes, but I finished it in around 45 minutes. Way too long, sure, but Neo Star 4? Yeah, this one took me over 70 minutes, literally an hour of my life practicing one singular level, and I still hadn't finished it. No PNGs for this. You're looking at me directly looking at you for this whole thing. I'm dead puppin' serious. So what the heck made this so hard? I'll try not to act surprised here, but everything. The first room alone felt like an RNG fest for a good half hour or so. Rocks falling from the ceiling that either halt your jump, causing you to fall into the lava, or worse, they just hit you and straight up so you take damage. Given that there's so much lava on the floor, and I want to play quickly to help with consistently, not to mention help with time, holy moly, remember how long this took, and it made the successful run look like a work of art. This little air puff near the end was actually a late discovery. It looks suboptimal, but trust me, I gotta do it. Otherwise, I lost stability for the little bit of the room that I had left. I got hit enough times to know this was necessary. The next room has a similar problem to what Neo Star 3 had. Lots of small bits of terrain that's either very easy to miss, loaded with enemies, or both. Unlike that level, which had bottomless pits, this has lava, which can have enemies hiding inside. So, yes, this was much worse. Not only that, but it has moving terrain too. Terrain that moves very slowly. It's kind of nice if we want to risk the occasional ice cube attack. And you can see I like going for it sometimes, but on the whole, it's safer to either air puff or zoom me ahead and ignore the problem altogether. Now, I have barely bought up Day-to-Day throughout this run, but let me just say right now that in Kirby 64, he controls really badly. He's functional, he's just really slow, very clunky, and all around feels worse than Kirby. I can look past a lot because I love the guy, but for this challenge in particular, avoiding damage felt impossible. Thankfully it wasn't, but the precision needed in both landing on the smallest ground surrounded by lava on top of enemies that damage you coming from all kinds of directions and having to do this multiple times. Yeah, this was brutal, but being honest, just getting past the enemies who jump out of the lava, that was hard enough. They're pretty basic when you're Kirby, but again, Day-to-Day in this game, it's just suffering. And near the end of the room, there's also this Bronto bird that flies up and down, and getting through this without taking a hit actually just felt like RNG. Yeah, I know what RNG is like. I speedrun Superstar Ultra. Top 10 in the world, baby. And this isn't RNG, but it sure heckin' feels like it. It got me man enough to consider it RNG at least. Of course, the level can't be over yet because the next room, okay, it's probably the easiest of the whole level, but that doesn't make it easy at all. The only relief here is that all of the challenges feel segmented. You know, you come across some scary enemy placements or some small terrain, stuff like that, but once you deal with that thing, you're good until the next obstacle shows up. they're contained rather than everything before this just being compounded into this constant stress and misery and ugh. That said, I did reset here a lot because of the Bronto Bursts. This 2.5D angle, or 2.5D, whatever, made it really hard to judge where they would attack me. This is a very rare instance of me being more than okay to take the slow approach. Then there's the Cha-Cha room. Can't believe my voters would kill off the Cha-Cha. The community is in shambles. Also, I got this shard here because I'm cute. And then another nightmarishly long room with a twist. It's kind of an auto-scroller, but not the kind that you can relax during. Of course not. Why would we be able to do that in Neostar? No, this has an active wall of lava chasing after you, so if you aren't constantly going fast, it will catch up, and, you guessed it, deal damage. If this wasn't an auto-scroller, this would be a normal amount of tough, like the second room, but having to move fast without making a single mistake puts on a lot of pressure. Near the end of the room, I waited for a Burnus to pass by because I almost got hit, and that alone almost costed me the successful run. Look at this! It's absolute nonsense! And there is still another room left! This one is on the simpler end in terms of concept. Just get to the very top, you can move on. But again, lava is rising from the bottom, so you need to be quick. Thankfully, this one isn't quite as punishing as the previous one. I guess floating in this game is just faster than running, but I still died a lot here. Tricky enemy placements, enemies that home in on you, moving too slow, and getting hit by lava, you name it, it's a struggle. Not to mention, there are some enemies at the very end that you can't really wait around for because of the rising lava, but despite all of the hardships, we pulled through, and that's the level done. No surprise, 5 Rage Pups out of 5. I'd give it more if I had less respect for math. But the worst part, at least Neostar 4 is possible. Yeah, those are the worst kinds of words to hear in a video like this, but when we move on to the boss of Neostar, Magman, you know, the man who's mag, it's, to get the good news out of the way, it's technically possible. When I ultimately finished this, I hadn't taken a single hit, so yeah, if it's a matter of technicality, sure, you can do it. But could I do it? Klaire Fluffle? Top 10 speedrunner in the world for Kirby Super Star Ultra? Hey! No, I couldn't. I had to use the Switch's suspend points. Although I did get Phase 1 done without them, let's be fair here. Which, by the way, felt like a total crapshoot. Even after over 80 minutes, just a single boss took longer than all of the hardest and longest level thus far. I can't tell you how the space in here works after everything. I am not sure if this is true. I'm just gonna say it like it is. Whether or not the ice cube actually hits Magman, it's just RNG. It's complete chance. Correct me in the comments if you want. I always read them. I don't mind. But just look at the footage. I don't know what footage I'm using, but I'm sure you can tell there's no consistency here. It's awful. But at least, you can clear this without getting hit. You will get hit, and you're gonna need to reset, but with enough tries and enough patience, it'll happen. Phase 2 is the one that, while technically possible, feels impossible. To deal damage during this phase, you need to hit Magman's face. Kind of rude, not to mention brutal, but given we're just a melting ice cube, you can't get close enough without getting hit by Magman's mag body. The only exception that will not get you damage is when he tucks in his chest to breathe in before releasing a wave of fire. Here, you can get close enough and then run away, crouch to avoid getting hit. Problem is, again, this feels like RNG. Admittedly, this is actually less RNG and more like micro spacing, but with how precise, you know, micro spacing is, it feels like RNG. Oh, and you actually have a high chance of being hit during Phase 2, unlike Phase 1, so there's that too. All in all, this was the worst part of the run. I can't even give it a rating on the Rage Pup meter. It just gets just solid. I couldn't legitimately do this, and I'm, like, actually upset. Now, doing this just regular damageless, pretty easy. There's a lot of ability combos that have an easy time. Literally, the speedrun uses Cutter plus Burning, and that's easy. Using the Melting Ice Cube, That's a little trickier, but if you can conserve enough health going into phase 2, I really would not call this impossible, or even that hard if I'm being honest. Combining the two together, though, was absolute misery. I hated this. And rewatching all of this footage and me constantly having to reload save states, yeah, I still hate this. Shiver Star time. Yeah, we still have 2 whole worlds to go. No time for rest. Thankfully, at least for now, Shiver Star isn't nearly as tough as Neo Star. The first room feels a fair amount of tough, the one that cost me a lot of resets, but this was due to things like tough enemy placements and snow slowing down Kirby's movement. Not the Neo Star stuff. No way. Still, I had to redo this room a bunch of times, and it's clear to see with how precise my movements are, just how many times I had to do this. Doing a bunch of small little jumps really helps speed things up, and is a nice visual indicator of how much your ground movement is slowed down by the snow. But, yeah, most of the rest of this level is okay. Waddle the auto-scroller, some ladders to climb, pretty intense area with ice covering water that has some scary enemy placements. Stuff like Chili and Sparky, these kind of get me tense because their attacks are so long-lasting. They don't just run around or go blue and do nothing else. Their whole body is covered with hitbox, and that makes them scary. Speaking of scary, though, wow, the mini-boss! Actually, unironically, this one is kind of tough because the mini-boss itself is on the harder end. I know, 5 worlds in, a mini-boss poses a threat for normal reasons. Although these Friggies most certainly don't help. See, the melting ice cube can't melt the big Chili before they use their attack, so I take the early downtime to take some of the Friggies down, and then, when I have my opening, I just mash that attack button and go to town. It gives me just enough time to do this damage list, and it feels really satisfying. The final room is by far the most threatening. Yariko show their obnoxious selves again, and there are these super silly looking enemies, Putts, that push boulders down cliffs and then go blah, blah, blah. I love them so much. These are scary though, and can only be reliably avoided by floating, which leaves us nearly defenseless, but with a knowledge of how the level works, we can avoid the boulders fairly okay. I almost got eaten by a maw near the very end, and I would have been a raging gamer pup if I did, but since I didn't, yeah, this was a tough call, but I'm gonna go with 4 rage pups out of 5 for this one. After Neo Star, as much as I did enjoy this level, it was not what I wanted to see. But after that, surely we have a nice simple level on our hands, right? This one took me a bit over 35 minutes. Yeah, I know, after Neo Star, it doesn't seem like much, but remember when I said levels took around 20 minutes on average? Yeah, 35 is a lot longer than that, and this is another level where a huge part of the problem is the foreground blocking obstacles. And again, in a regular playthrough, I think this is super cool. Me likey. But in a run like this, me don't likey. Of course, it can't just be that. There's your standards of enemies being placed in annoying spots, bottomless pits making the melting ice cube nearly impossible to use, the standard stuff. But once we get to the parts where the Mapoos are jumping out of the clouds, with no way to know when they're coming except having the foresight of where they are, is when this level got ridiculous. I'll be honest, at this point, this was 2 rage pups out of 5 at best, but these little tricksters get devious. All with that super happy smile on their face. How about that? And to be honest, they're really the only frustrating part of this whole level. Oh, okay, the Maws too, I hate them. Oh, and the happy face, specifically, the big Mapoo. Don't even get me started. I already didn't like this fight because of speedrunning, so it's just made it even worse. Because of the Maws, the foreground, and the Mapoo, big and small, this is another 4 out of 5 rage pups for me. Can I just catch a break already? Like, come on. Wait, what do you mean the rest of Shiver Star was super easy? I guess the first room of Shiver Star 3 was pretty tough, but you're given just enough free space to where floating really helps. And nowhere in the mall is particularly threatening. Simple patience and understanding of when and where we are and how to use abilities, like the melting ice cube, it's really the only ability, solves most of those issues. The mini-boss was really fun, actually, trying to predict where this one is gonna land. That's always a silly fun time. Oh, I guess the final room with the Shotzo is pretty scary because we can't outpace their shots. So we just wait behind the protective glass whenever possible and then keep moving. Yeah, as long as you keep moving forward, you're golden. 2 Rage Pups out of 5. This was some very smooth sailing. But surely Shiver Star 4, the factory, has to be harder, right? Well, there was a day-to-day section. I died there a few times, but I put that more in how poorly day-to-day handles than things actually being tough. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe I reset a couple of times because I was being silly, but no, the factory was only slightly harder than the mall. There's some kind of social commentary in there, I'm sure. And the mini-boss also wasn't too hard. They freeze when they get hit. It makes sense, we do have ice in our kit, so the melting ice cube didn't even have a hard time there. Yeah, still just 2 Rage Pups out of 5. Not too shabby. But surely HRH will be difficult. Yeah, not really. I'll admit that fatigue was hitting me really hard. I wound up using suspend points once I reached phase 2 just to see how silly of a solution for killing this thing I could get away with. But with or without those, it wasn't hard. I just needed some energy at this point. I did Worlds 1 through 3 in one stream and then 4 through 6 on another. The first stream was great, but I had been at Neo and Shiver Star alone for really over 3 hours. And phase 2, to be fair, can be kind of tricky if you can't find a consistent way to get hits, but if you hide underneath the machine and just keep trying, you'll find something eventually. I'll give this one 2 Rage Pups and not 1, just because I'm sure this would at least be a little bit harder without the suspend points, but again, far from impossible. After, everything with Neo Star and the beginning bits of Shiver Star, you'd expect Ripple Star to also be really tough. Maybe even tougher than Neo Star. Please, oh god, wait, no. Please, I'm begging you, please, please! Well, I'm actually going to skip the theatrics on this one and tell you that, no, Ripple Star is not harder than Neo Star. Frankly, I'd say this was easier than Pop Star. Yeah, the first level is nothing but a retread of the first one, with the mini-boss being the only threatening part. I was really worried about this one when I speedrun Kirby 64. I get hit by this guy all the time, but the pattern is so simple that I had it figured out in no time. As for the second level, certainly, yeah, it's atmospheric. Again, Kirby 64 killing it here. But the level itself doesn't have any scary enemy layouts, and the bulk of it has you in no danger. That third level, the final enemy gauntlet of the game, that one's certainly a toughie, but nothing we haven't handled before. If you can get into a good pattern, I'd even go as far as to say it's also a very easy level. Yeah, I hate to end on such a basic note, but 2 Rage Puppies out of 5 for Ripple Star 1, 1 out of 5 for Ripple Star 2, and yeah, 2 out of 5 for Ripple Star 3. There's nothing scary. And you know what? Even Miracle Matter wasn't so bad. Although the fatigue of the run almost being 8.5 hours in total, that was absolutely setting in. Yeah, I was at this for a long time. Anyways, it's obvious you can't actually win with the Melting Ice Cube here, since Miracle Matter is only weak to whatever element it's currently using. So, as a compromise, I took down the Burning Miracle Matter and the Ice Miracle Matter, neither of which were difficult, before bidding farewell to our heroic hero, the Melting Ice Cube. Maybe it was insanity finally setting in, maybe the Melting Ice Cube actually is OP, who knows, but nothing in Ripple Star was all that hard. Honestly, Miracle Matter gets another 2 Rage Pups out of 5. You know things are pretty dire when I can make the statement, yeah, Miracle Matter's cool, but Adeline was way harder, and be wholly, genuinely serious. But, anticlimactic or not, we are finally done. 2 streams, over 8.5 hours, lots of dying. Trial and error, we can answer the question, is the impossible Kirby 64 challenge possible? The very beginning and the very end notwithstanding, for reasons outside of our control, yes. Kirby 64 can not only be cleared with just the Melting Ice Cube, but you can clear every level and every boss, technically, it's available in without taking a single hit. Some levels are certainly harder than others, but every one of them, with enough practice and skill, can be cleared. And you know what? With a few exceptions, all of them being a Neo and Shiver Star, by the way, maybe Adeline as well, I suppose, I wouldn't say this was even all that hard. Sure, Kirby 64 is far from the most difficult game, but going in, I was using the single most memed on ability in the game, maybe even the whole of Kirby. So for this to be easy, with some exceptions, was really not at all what I expected. If nothing else, I also hope this video taught you just how funny the enemy names are in Kirby 64. Real delight those are. But no matter what, it's done, it's over, and now I can rest. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I haven't done a challenge run like this in such a long time, but before I became a speedrun focused channel, this was all I used to do. I kinda miss making these, and I hope I get the chance to make more. If you like what you see, please support the video by giving it a like, leaving a comment, subscribing to the channel, you know the drill. You can go the extra mile if you'd like by becoming a Puptron on Patreon, or a Mempup on YouTube for all kinds of perks, including behind the scenes, game stuff, anime stuff, cartoon stuff, movie stuff, who knows? Special thanks to my head-patting, full-level fan Puptrons and Mempups, Freakish Uproar, Lydia Scribe, Nightfall, Galaxy Fan 4, and Arthur Legal 250V. I love you all! And until I see you all again, I have been Klaire. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you all around. Bye-bye!